Stand quietly in the corner. His fiancée ordered the maid's toddler at the gala. The billionaire's reaction shocked everyone. You need to hear this. A 3-year-old little girl, standing alone in the corner of a grand ballroom. Hundreds of dressed-up guests walking right past her. Not one person stopping to ask if she was okay. She wasn't crying. She wasn't making a scene. She was just standing there. Tiny hands folded. Big brown eyes watching the sparkling lights above her like she was trying to disappear into the wall. And then, the most powerful man in that room turned around, locked eyes with that little girl, and in front of everyone, did something nobody expected. Something that would change 4 lives forever. Something that would make a room full of millionaires go completely silent. I still get chills every single time I think about this story. Welcome back, friends, to a channel where real human moments remind us what truly matters in this world. If you're new here, we are so glad you found us today because this one is something special. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments. It genuinely amazes me how many hearts from all over the world gather right here for stories like this one. Today's story is emotional. It is heartwarming. It has a twist that I promise you will not see coming. And by the time it ends, you might find yourself looking at the people around you just a little differently. So settle in, take a breath, and let's begin. Sometimes the cruelest words are spoken in the softest voices, and the quietest people carry the heaviest hearts. His name was Nathaniel Brooks. Nate to the people who actually knew him, though fewer and fewer people could claim that these days. At 35, he had built one of the most respected real estate development companies on the East Coast, turning broken-down neighborhoods into thriving communities, revitalizing cities that had been forgotten by everyone else. Forbes had featured him twice. His name was on buildings. His signature was on checks that kept schools and food banks running in 3 different states. But if you asked Nate himself what he was most proud of, he would have told you it wasn't any of that. He would have told you about his mother. Eleanor Brooks had cleaned houses and office buildings for 31 years. She had worked double shifts so that Nate could have new sneakers and a graphing calculator and a prom suit that actually fit. She had never once complained. Never once made him feel like a burden. She had just worked, quietly, faithfully, with dignity that most people with twice her income could never dream of having. Nate had grown up watching his mother move through other people's spaces, invisible, essential, and almost always overlooked. It was a lesson that carved itself into his chest and never left. Which is why, when his assistant hired Maria Delgado to manage the housekeeping at his Boston penthouse, Nate had made something very clear from the beginning. Maria was to be treated with complete respect. Always. Maria was 31 years old, originally from San Antonio, Texas, hard-working and soft-spoken with a laugh that could fill up a quiet room. She had a daughter, a tiny, wide-eyed 3-year-old named Sophia. Sophia had her mother's dark curls and her late father's dimples, and she had this habit of tilting her head sideways whenever she was thinking really hard about something, like she was trying to pour her thoughts from one side of her brain to the other. Maria's childcare arrangements had fallen through 3 months after she started working for Nate, and rather than lose her, or worse, leave her without options, Nate had told her simply that Sophia could come to work with her whenever necessary. He had even set up a small play corner near the kitchen with books and soft toys, because that was just the kind of man Nate Brooks was when no cameras were pointed at him. Enter Vanessa Cole, 29 years old. Sharp as a blade and twice as cold when she wanted to be. She had walked into Nate's life at a charity auction 18 months ago, all red dress and easy confidence, and he had been captivated. She was beautiful and clever and socially polished in ways that impressed the circles he moved in. She had an interior design firm with a growing client list and an Instagram following that made PR people pay attention. They got engaged 4 months ago. Nate's mother had smiled the way mothers smile when they're not quite sure but they're hoping. Nate was in love, or at least he believed he was. He had not yet seen Vanessa in a moment that cost her something. That moment was coming. It was coming on a Saturday night in April, at the annual Heritage Foundation Gala held at the Langston Grand Hotel in downtown Boston, one of the most prestigious charity events in New England, attended by politicians, executives, philanthropists, and socialites. Nate's company was one of the lead sponsors this year, which meant his presence wasn't optional. It also meant Vanessa would be on his arm, radiant and rehearsed, working the room like she had been born for it. The problem was Maria. Her babysitter had cancelled that afternoon. A family emergency, completely out of her control. Maria had called Nate's assistant in a panic, ready to call in sick, ready to figure something out, not wanting to cause any disruption. But Nate had heard about it and called her directly. "Bring Sophia," he said simply. "There's a quiet lounge near the event staff area. She'll be fine back there with some snacks and her tablet. Don't stress about it." Maria had exhaled like she'd been holding that breath for hours. "Are you sure, Mr. Brooks?" "Maria, I'm sure. Just come." So she came. Sophia arrived in a little navy dress with white buttons, clutching a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit and looking around the hotel lobby with the enormous, reverent eyes of a child who has never seen chandeliers before. Nate spotted them as he was finishing up a conversation near the entrance. He crouched down to Sophia's level, right there in his tuxedo, and said, "Hey, Sophia. Do you see how sparkly those lights are up there?" Sophia looked up, tilted her head, and said, "They look like frozen stars." Nate laughed. Genuinely laughed. "That might be the best description of a chandelier I've ever heard." Everything was fine. Until Vanessa walked over. "Now here's a question for you. Have you ever watched someone reveal their true character in a single moment and felt the ground shift beneath your feet? Because that's exactly what was about to happen. Not everry beautiful thing is good. And not every good thing announces itself loudly. Vanessa had been in the powder room when Nate crouched down to talk to Sophia. By the time she glided back into the lobby, stunning in a floor-length ivory gown, her blonde hair pinned perfectly, the interaction was over and Maria was guiding Sophia toward the back corridor. But Vanessa noticed. She didn't say anything immediately. She took Nate's arm with a practiced smile, leaned in close and murmured, "Why is the housekeeper here?" "With her child," Nate explained quietly. "Babysitter fell through." He'd told Maria to bring Sophia. It wasn't a big deal. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. But something behind her eyes did. "Tonight of all nights, Nate. This is the Heritage Gala. There are board members here. Senators. Do you think it looks good to have? She's in the back lounge, Vanessa. Nobody's going to see her. I just think it sends a message." "What message would that be?" His voice was still calm, still gentle. Vanessa pivoted smoothly. "Never mind. Let's not get into it here." She kissed him on the cheek and the subject apparently was closed. Nate let it go. He shouldn't have. The evening moved forward. The gala was everything these events always were. Gleaming tables, overpriced wine, speeches about generosity delivered by people who would write it off on their taxes. Nate worked the room dutifully, shaking hands, accepting praise for the company's sponsorship, genuinely connecting with a few people he actually respected. Vanessa was, by every external measure, perfect. She was charming, articulate, and completely at ease. She remembered names and asked follow-up questions and laughed at exactly the right moments. The room loved her. Several of Nate's colleagues pulled him aside to say what a wonderful woman she was. He smiled and nodded. Maria, meanwhile, had settled Sophia in the small lounge near the event staff hallway, a comfortable enough space with a couch and a coffee table. Sophia had her tablet, her rabbit, her juice box, and a little container of crackers. She was perfectly content. But somewhere around the 2-hour mark of the evening, while Nate was across the ballroom deep in conversation with the foundation's executive director, something happened. Sophia wondered. 3-year-olds do that. You turn around for 30 seconds and the world has swallowed them. Maria had stepped into the adjacent hallway to take a call from her sister, just a few feet away within earshot, and Sophia, curious and unafraid the way only very young children can be, had pushed open the side door and toddled into the edge of the ballroom. She stood at the perimeter of the room, wide-eyed, clutching biscuit, watching the glittering adults with pure wonder. She wasn't making noise. She wasn't touching anything. She was just looking. Vanessa saw her first. And Vanessa walked straight over to her. Later, there would be different accounts of exactly what happened next. Different people who saw different pieces of it. But the account that mattered came from a woman named Diane Cho, a non-profit director seated at a table near the wall, who watched the whole thing unfold from just a few feet away. Vanessa crouched down to Sophia's level. Her smile, Diane would later describe, was the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Hi there," Vanessa said. "What's your name?" "Sophia," the little girl said. "Well, Sophia, you shouldn't be in here. This isn't a place for little kids." Vanessa's voice was low, almost sweet, the kind of quiet that only sounds gentle on the surface. "You need to go stand quietly in the corner right over there and wait. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just stand there until someone comes to get you. Can you do that?" Sophia looked at the corner, then back at Vanessa. "Okay," she said softly. And she walked to the corner, clutching her rabbit, standing absolutely still. Dan Cho stared. She looked around to see if anyone else had witnessed what just happened. A few other guests at her table had. Nobody moved. What do you think should have happened in that moment? Because what happened next was something none of them expected. The truth doesn't always arrive with a warning. Sometimes it just walks into the room quietly, the way a 3-year-old carrying a stuffed rabbit can walk into a room and rearrange everything. Nate Brooks was in the middle of a sentence. He was talking to Gerald Hoffman, executive director of the Heritage Foundation, about a proposed low-income housing development on the South Side. A project Nate genuinely cared about, the kind of work that reminded him why he'd built the company in the first place. Gerald was nodding, interested, asking good questions. And then Nate saw her. He wasn't even sure at first what made him look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way his eyes, trained by years of walking construction sites and reading spaces, automatically registered something that was out of place. Not wrong exactly, just solitary. Small child. Standing alone in the corner of the ballroom. Navy dress. White buttons. A stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest. Standing so still it broke your heart. "Excuse me 1 second, Nate said to Gerald. He crossed the room. He didn't rush, but his stride was purposeful, and several people who would later describe the moment said there was something about the look on his face. Not angry, not alarmed, but deeply and quietly focused, that made them watch. He crouched down in front of Sophia. "Hey, Bug," he said. He'd heard Maria call her that. "What are you doing way over here?" Sophia looked up at him with those enormous eyes. "The pretty lady said stand quietly in the corner," she said, with the complete, earnest honesty of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are complicated. Nate went very still. "Which pretty lady?" he asked gently. Sophia pointed. Across the room, Vanessa was laughing at something a city councilman had said. Her hand resting gracefully on his arm, completely at ease, unbothered. Nate looked at his fiancée. Then looked back at the 3-year-old standing alone in the corner of a crowded ballroom, holding a rabbit, doing exactly what she'd been told because she was 3 years old and she didn't know she didn't have to. Something in Nate's chest cracked open in that moment. Not with rage. With clarity. He stood up slowly. He took off his jacket. His tailored, expensive tuxedo jacket, and he draped it gently over Sophia's shoulders like a little cape. It swallowed her completely, sleeves hanging past her hands, hem nearly touching the floor. Sophia looked down at it, then up at him. She tilted her head sideways. "You look like a superhero," Nate said quietly. "Actually, you know what? You are a superhero. And superheroes don't have to stand in corners. He picked her up. He picked up a 3-year-old in a ballroom full of Boston's most powerful people, settled her on his arm like she weighed nothing and like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he carried her, jacket caped and rabbit clutching, right back through the center of that grand room. The room went quiet. Not all at once. In waves. The way silence spreads at a gala when something real interrupts the performance of the evening. Diane Cho put down her wine glass. Gerald Hoffman, still standing where Nate had left him, watched with an expression that one of his colleagues would later describe as the most genuine thing I've seen at one of these things in 15 years. Vanessa turned. She saw Nate crossing the ballroom with Sophia on his arm. She saw the jacket. She saw the way people were watching. And for the first time that evening, her composure showed a crack. Not guilt, not quite. More like recalculation. More like someone who has just realized the ground has shifted and is trying to figure out what that means for their footing. Nate walked past the table where Maria had just rushed in, breathless and wide-eyed. Having found the lounge empty and spent 4 terrifying minutes looking for her daughter. She's here, Nate said simply. She's okay. He set Sophia down gently in front of her mother. Maria's eyes filled with tears immediately. She crouched and pulled Sophia close, checking her over the way parents do. Face, hands, arms, making sure she was all in one piece. She's okay, Nate said again, more softly this time, directly to Maria. I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened. Maria looked up at him. Mr. Brooks. Nate. This isn't your fault. I know whose fault it is, he said quietly. And he turned around. Here is the question I need you to sit with right now. What would you do if you were Nate in this moment? Would you confront the situation publicly, in front of everyone? Or would you choose a quieter, more private reckoning? Because what Nate did next wasn't loud. It wasn't a scene. And somehow, that made it more powerful than anything else he could have done. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to pretend. Nate didn't cause a scene. He wasn't built for scenes. He was built for decisions. He walked calmly back through the ballroom, accepted a glass of water from a passing server, and made his way to where Vanessa was standing. She was already watching him. Her expression had settled back into something serene and controlled, but her fingers around her champagne flute were slightly tighter than they needed to be. "Can I talk to you?" he said quietly. "Of course." She smiled for the people around them. "Excuse us," she said graciously, and they stepped toward one of the quieter alcoves near the edge of the room. The moment they were out of direct earshot, Vanessa spoke first. "I handled it, Nate. She wandered in and I redirected her. I don't know why you're treating this like. You told a 3-year-old to stand quietly in the corner. I told her to wait somewhere so she didn't disrupt the event. She's 3, Vanessa." His voice was steady, quiet. The kind of quiet that meant every word was chosen carefully. She was standing there alone, doing exactly what you told her to do, because she's a child and she trusted an adult. She had no idea she didn't have to listen to you. "You're being dramatic." "I don't think I am." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, a gesture that in other circumstances might have looked thoughtful but right now looked like someone repositioning. "I understand you have a soft spot for Maria. That's generous of you, genuinely. But this is the Heritage Gala. The optics of having—" "I need you to hear what you just said," Nate interrupted, still gently. "You're talking about optics. I'm talking about a little girl standing alone in a corner because someone made her feel like she didn't belong." Silence. "This isn't about the gala," he said. "This is about who you are when you think it doesn't cost you anything." Vanessa stared at him. For just a moment, something behind her eyes went uncertain, as if some part of her recognized the ground she was standing on. But then it closed. "I think you're overreacting," she said. "Let's go back to the table and we can talk about this later like adults." Nate looked at the woman he had planned to marry. He thought about his mother. About 31 years of cleaning other people's houses. About the way Eleanor Brooks had moved through rooms just like this one. Invisible, essential, overlooked. He thought about the lesson that had carved itself into his chest when he was 12 years old and watched a man in a suit walk past his mother in a hotel hallway without once acknowledging that she existed. He thought about Sophia, standing in a corner in a navy dress, holding her rabbit, waiting. "I don't think I'm overreacting," he said. He set his water glass down on a nearby table. He walked back to where Maria was sitting with Sophia. Someone had brought the little girl a slice of chocolate cake, and she was eating it with a complete focus that only children and people who truly appreciate dessert can manage. His tuxedo jacket was still around her shoulders. Nate pulled up a chair. He sat down with them. And he stayed there for the rest of the evening. People noticed. Course they noticed. In a room full of people performing importance, a billionaire who pulls up a chair next to the housekeeper and her 3-year-old stands out with the force of a lighthouse. Gerald Hoffman noticed. He made a note of it in the way that quietly good people make notes of things. Not for use, just for remembrance. A few other guests smiled. One older woman, a retired federal judge named Constance Barrow, actually crossed the room to introduce herself to Maria and spent 20 minutes talking to her about San Antonio because it turned out she'd grown up there too. Vanessa left early. She texted Nate from the car. "We need to have a serious conversation about your priorities." He read it, and for a long time he just looked at those words. Then he looked at Sophia, who had fallen asleep against her mother's arm, still wearing his jacket, rabbit tucked under her chin, cake stained and completely at peace. And he wrote back, "I agree. We do." By morning everything had changed. The things that break us open are sometimes the things that finally let the light in. 3 weeks later, Nate met his mother for lunch at her favorite diner in Cambridge. The kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that comes in thick ceramic mugs and pie that tastes like someone's grandmother made it at 5 in the morning because she genuinely couldn't sleep until it was done. Eleanor Brooks was 62 years old. She had finally retired the previous fall, and she wore retirement the way she wore everything, with a certain practical grace, unsentimental but warm. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Nate finished, she was quiet for a long moment. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I should have seen it sooner," he said. "You saw it when you needed to." A little girl stood alone in a corner. "And then she didn't," Eleanor said simply. "Because of you." They sat with that for a moment. "Your father," Eleanor said, which was something she rarely said, "used to believe that character isn't who you are when things are easy. It's who you are when something costs you something." She looked at her son carefully. "This cost you something." "She wasn't right for me, Mom." "No," Eleanor agreed. "She wasn't." He had ended the engagement 5 days after the gala. Had not been dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no thrown objects, no social media salvos. Nate had sat across from Vanessa in the living room of her apartment and explained, calmly and honestly, that he didn't think they were right for each other. That he had seen something at the gala that showed him a fundamental difference in how they saw people, and he didn't believe that difference was something either of them could grow their way out of. Vanessa had been furious, then cutting, then coldly composed. She told him he was throwing away something real because of a sentimental moment over a maid's kid. "I know that's how you see it," he said. "That's actually kind of the point." He left her apartment and walked 15 blocks home in the April night air and felt, more than anything, that something had been returned to him. Some version of himself that he'd been slowly, quietly drifting away from without fully realizing it. As for Maria and Sophia, the story doesn't end at the gala. 6 months later, with Nate's support and a referral letter that he spent considerable time writing with genuine care, Maria enrolled in a property management certification program. She had mentioned once in passing that she'd always been interested in how buildings worked, How communities came together, how spaces shaped lives. Nate had filed that away the way he filed away things that mattered. She graduated 14 months after that. Today, Maria Delgado manages tenant relations for one of Nate's mid-size residential properties in the South End. A job she is, by every account, remarkable at. She has a gift, her colleagues say, for making people feel seen. For making them feel like they belong in the spaces they live in. Sophia is 5 now. She started kindergarten this fall. She still has biscuit. She still tilts her head sideways when she's thinking hard. Last spring, at a small company appreciation dinner that Nate hosts every year for his full staff, from executives to maintenance crews, everyone in the same room, no corner seating arrangements, Sophia walked up to him with the confidence of a child who has never been told her presence is an inconvenience, and she handed him a drawing she had made. It was a crayon rendering of a man in a big black jacket, recognizably a tuxedo, in the way that only a 5-year-old's interpretation can be, and a small girl with curly hair. At the bottom, in careful kindergarten letters that her mother had helped her with, it said, "Thank you for not leaving me in the corner." Nate put it in a frame. It hangs in his office today, between the Forbes feature and the architectural rendering of the South Side housing development that broke ground last March. He says it's the most important thing on that wall. Here's the truth that this story quietly carries. Dignity isn't something you earn by having the right last name, or wearing the right clothes, or attending the right events. Dignity is something every human being, every child, every parent, every person who has ever cleaned someone else's floors or raised their child alone or stood quietly in a corner because they were told to, carries within them, whole and undiminished. The greatest thing you can do in a crowded room isn't to impress the most important person there. It's to see the person everyone else walked past. That little girl didn't know she was making history that night. She was just holding her rabbit and doing what she was told. But the man who saw her, he made a choice. And that choice, that one quiet, jacket-giving, chair-pulling, world-rearranging choice, said more about who he was than every building with his name on it. Never let anyone put you in a corner. And if you see someone standing alone in one, walk over. Pull up a chair. If this story moved you, if it gave you something, even just a quiet moment of believing that good people still exist and good choices still matter, please give this video a like. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that remind you why human kindness is still the most powerful force in any room. And drop a comment below. I want to know, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Tell me. I read every single one. Finally, if you know someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible, that they are not meant for corners, that they belong fully in whatever room they're standing in, share this story with them today. Because sometimes, the right story finds someone at exactly the right time. And that's worth everything.